So we have a great program in store for you today. The two finalists for the race for Seattle Mayor are here. Please welcome Cary Moon and Jenny Durkan. They're up front here. It's great to have both of you here. And KUOW's Ross Reynolds is going to be interviewing the candidates here on stage in just a bit. But first, we have some club business to take care of. If you're visiting us today, we start our meetings with inspiration and music. Our invocation today will be led by past President Kathy Gibson. After that, Linda Ruff and Burr Stewart on the piano will lead us in song. So Kathy, come on up.
Today's inspiration spotlights peace. And in drafting my words, I was inspired by a peace prayer of Pastor Cindy Waldersdorf at the York Center Church in Lombard, Illinois. So these are some excerpts. When we cannot think of any solution other than war, let's get smarter. When we refuse to see the needs in this world, let's open our eyes. When we listen only to those who agree with us, let's open our ears and embrace dialogue. When we are satisfied with the divisions between races and genders and economic classes, let's, as Rotarians, be dissatisfied until all are treated equally. And when we see weapons as our only choice, let's enlarge our imagination. When we grow comfortable with the way things are, let's promote the changes that are needed to set things right. And when others think violence and intolerance are inevitable, and peace is unrealistic, as Rotarians, let's take a stand. Indeed, Rotarians around the world promote peace every day as we model the values of tolerance, acceptance, inclusion, respect, and nonviolence. In short, we are peace builders. And we are not alone, as others of goodwill do the same. Tomorrow, September 21st, in shared action, communities large and small around the globe will observe the United Nations 35th International Day of Peace, including a moment of silence at 12 noon. I invite you now to join me to reflect on your peace priorities, either as a prayer or as a promise to do more to be a peace builder in our world. Let's promote peace.
You know, I know as a journalist we're not supposed to give our opinions, right? But when I read the voter's guide before the primary election, I honestly was surprised pleasantly by the caliber and the quality of candidates running for Seattle Mayor. Now, I know there were 21 of them, but that said, there were still just a number of very qualified, accomplished candidates, very well respected in their community. That field of 21 is now down to 2, Cary Moon and Jenny Durkan. Today we're going to get to know them a little bit better in a conversation with KUOW's Ross Reynolds. Ross came to KUOW 30 years ago, if you can believe it. He has served as news director, program director, and host of a number of award-winning programs. He is now executive director of community engagement. And for my money, he's one of the best interviewers in the business. So please give Ross Reynolds and our candidates for Mayor, Jenny Durkan and Cary Moon, a warm Seattle 4 welcome. Welcome.
Thank you all for coming out today. We're looking forward to this conversation that we'll be having. I guess they're doing this at least every day somewhere. Usually it's 90 seconds in and out, but today we're going to be having a less formal conversation than that. It's important to note that more people voted for the 19 other folks running for mayor in the primary than voted for both of these two candidates together. So there's a lot of persuasion still to go on. I just heard So once again, Jenny Durkan, former U.S. attorney, when she graduated from UW Law School, her mother said, finally, someone's going to pay you to argue. And also Cary Moon, engineer, urban planner, self-described wonk. And isn't it great that wonk is something you want to call yourself if you're going to be running for office these days? Welcome. Just finally, I just want to say that, as some of you know firsthand, running for office is extremely difficult to do. You have to test your belief. Perform silly skits sometimes. You have to answer any and every rude query that might come your way. So let's just give a hand for these women for putting themselves into the arena. So now for one of those rude questions. How do you make a living, Jenny Durkan? I mean, you were U.S. Attorney, but how do you make a living these days? How could you afford to run?
Running for office is tough, and I tell you, those people, I've been able to take a leave of absence for my job, and so I've been able to devote full time to this since about 3 weeks after I announced. Right after I announced, I was actually representing the Muckleshoot tribe in an inquest involving a tribal member who was killed, and did that full time, and then moved to the campaign. But it's an incredible barrier, and I think we have to do more about removing those barriers so more people feel that they can run for office. It's expensive to run money. If you have to work. I mean, we saw some of the candidates, including Bob Hasagawa and Nikita Oliver, who, had to juggle full-time jobs and show up at the forums that we were all at, where the two of us were lucky enough not to have to do that full-time.
So what do you do for a living, Cary Moon, and can you afford to run for office?
So first, thanks for having us here, because this is a great dialogue I'm looking forward to. I had an earlier career as an engineer. I've worked as an urban planner and activist since about 1997 when I finished graduate school. And in the past few years, I have been fortunate enough to spend my time on sabbatical, is what I called it, because I got so frustrated after the financial crisis of 2008 and watching the left not come up with a vision, not come up with an action plan, not come up with solutions. I felt really determined to get in there and understand macroeconomics, understand the housing market and the macroeconomics of housing and the affordability crisis, understand why we're not making progress on racial equity. So I have basically spent the last 3 years doing my own sort of graduate level work in these issues through working with Progress Alliance and other allied organizations doing progressive change in our state. But I did that on my own dime because it's really important to me. I felt an immense duty to spend the time and the effort I have through the privileges I have accrued through my life towards the public interest, towards working for constructive change.
I had a couple questions about your background. Cary, you worked at the Department of Labor in Washington, then you spent 4 years at a Redmond manufacturing company, then you moved to Michigan to work with an industrial company that was run by your family. What was that? Was that move to Michigan planned? Did you really want to remain in Michigan? How did that work for you?
Yeah, so as an engineer, I worked in other companies, and really the more I worked other places, the more I understood what a magical place my family business was. It was a very unique company where all the profits were shared across the whole enterprise, all decision-making was shared, people were cross-trained on every job. It was a very high involvement workplace. We ended up paying 1.5 to 2 times prevailing wage. And we developed an employee ownership program, so all the employees were part owners of the company. And I realized that there was something really great about how the company was run, and honestly, my dad worked or played golf all the time, and I wasn't gonna pick up golf, so I thought if I wanna get to know my dad, I gotta go work with him. And so I worked there for 3 years as operations manager, running the company when he was away, and really developed a tremendous understanding of how to build commitment across an enterprise and sharing power, sharing profits, sharing ownership as a way to achieve shared goals together and build fulfilling lives for folks.
Jenny Durkan, your father, Martin Durkan, was a powerful state senator, later a very influential lobbyist in our state. History Link calls Martin Durkan a cigar-smoking, deal-making, old-style politician. What did you learn from him about politics?
That he had to listen to my mother. That was the hardest deal he had to strike. I think that growing up in our family was incredibly lucky to grow up at a time when both my father was involved in politics, but my mother had come up through a time when during the war, women were called to work at home, at the home front. And she applied to be a jitney driver down on the port and was told women can't drive jitneys. She had a little conversation with the Irish man who ran the port, and within a few hours, she and her friends were driving jitneys. And so I learned very early on that there's got to be strength within a family to really conquer those issues that we care about. And the number one rule in our family was, when we came home from doing something, my dad's question or my mother's question was not, what did you do? It's what good did you do? There was a real emphasis to us, not unlike the Rotarian is. It's got to be, others before yourself, and that was what I learned growing up.
Jenny, you were a lawyer and a political advisor to former Governor Mike Lowry back in the 1990s. He was accused of sexual harassment by an aide. You resigned shortly afterwards. Was that because of the accusations?
It was a very involved thing in that. Mike and I continued to have a relationship over the years, but it was a very difficult situation because as a lawyer, my duty ran not to the governor, but to the employees, and the employee involved was actually my client. And so it was a complicated thing, and it was reflective. As you know, later on, I actually represented the woman who accused Senator Brock Adams of sexual misconduct, which led to his resignation. And during my early practice as a lawyer, I represented victims of sexual abuse and sexual misconduct. So it's an area that I care very deeply about and have worked on throughout my life.
Elections are all about differences, and I think many people are trying to parse the differences between the two of you. Cary Moon, you've said that dealing with unsanctioned homeless camps, which are dotting our trails and underpasses, shows the biggest difference between you and your opponent, Jenny Durkan. Now, I've listened closely to your responses to this at the first televised debate that you did. I had a hard time parsing the differences. Could you explain them for me?
So I believe we have spent too much time and energy talking about sweeps and not enough time and energy and resources providing folks who are unsheltered, living outside with nowhere to go, a place to come inside. That should be the heart of the conversation around homelessness. We need to understand, how do we get long-term affordable housing, long-term supportive housing for folks in need, and stop talking about the nuisance of sweeps and start talking about our brothers and sisters who have no place to be. So I want to focus on solutions to invite people inside, invite them to come inside, and then deal, after they've left, after they're in a safe place, then go clean up the mess that's been left because they didn't have access to sanitation or services.
But how does that differentiate you from Jenny Durkan? Are you saying different than what she's saying?
I think I've heard her say she would continue the sweeps. She can clarify here if she wants, but I thought I've heard her say that through previous forums and debates.
Well, first of all, Jenny Durkan, do you agree that this is a big difference between the two of you, how you would deal with these homeless camps that are unsanctioned? Do you agree that that's a huge difference?
I think there is a difference here and on several levels, and I do want to address what Cary said is, because I have been absolutely clear that if you mean sweeps as if you're treating people with a lack of dignity and you're pushing them aside, not offering them a place to live, disposing of their properties, and are inhumane, I am adamantly opposed to that. We have to treat people with respect and dignity. If you're saying that, I go back to the prayer we just talked about. The prayer started, if we're satisfied with war, we need to get smarter. Well, if we're satisfied with tents under freeways, we need to get smarter. So I think the difference is here. I have proposed real solutions and will continue to work on that. I think as the most prosperous city in the most prosperous country, the people living on the streets are the indicator of how well we're doing and whether we can do better. And we cannot allow for people to live in the conditions that are in the unsanctioned encampments and continue to let them do that and call ourselves moral. I just don't think we can. So I think we have to move people out of the tents. We offer them a place to live. I've proposed very specific, both short-term and long-term solutions to this that I think we need to do to solve the problem.
You said we have to move people out of the camps.
Correct.
To go away?
No, if you look
where
at the
to?
city program today, the navigation teams, which are interdisciplinary teams, including social workers and outreach people, work with the people to determine what property do they have, where does it need to be taken, are they willing to move to another location. They don't have anyone leave the encampment until they offer them a place to stay. I think that has to be the rule, but we need more short-term shelter because there's not enough of it. I've proposed specific numbers in every council district so every part of the city shoulders some of the burden. I've also proposed that we have additional outreach teams to work with the people in vehicles because that's not a solution either.
So you wouldn't move people out of camps unless there's a better place for them to go?
That's correct, and that's what we're doing today. That's what the navigation teams are doing today, working with people to make sure before they're asked to leave that they offer them a place to move.
Cary Moon, how is that different from what you say?
I disagree. That's not what we're doing today. We are forcing people to move, and we are, for some of them, especially women who are victims of domestic violence, throwing their lives further into chaos by moving them and their stuff from the one place they have found where they feel safer than they were before. And I think we have to be really mindful of using a social services, human services approach, not a public safety or cleanliness approach to helping these folks who are struggling and more vulnerable than anybody else in our society. So we absolutely have to find places to bring them inside, invite them inside with their property, and then clean up after, which is different than forcing people to move, chasing them from one location to another.
So are you suggesting that Jenny Durkan would force people out of unsanctioned homeless camps with no place to go?
Well, that's what we're doing now, and unless she says no, she's not in favor of that, then
Let's hear what she says.
It's actually not what the city's policy is now, and I have to disagree a little bit. There is no tent in this city that is a safe place for women and children. And I just think we have to be honest about that. And so I've said in multiple forums, which you fortunately haven't had to go to, that my number one focus in solving this problem is going to be on moms with kids. We have one of the highest ratios of any city in the country of moms living with their children in vehicles. And we have to prioritize those kids for their future and those moms. And the solutions for them is very different than the solutions for the heroin addicts in the tents. So we have to be smarter about addressing this crisis.
Jenny Durkan, you've said a big difference between you and your opponent has to do with your stance on the housing affordability and livability agenda. It's the plan to ensure that Seattle stays affordable to all folks. What is the difference between you and your opponent?
The biggest difference is I have said I will not start over on HALA. Well, I don't think it's perfect, and I think we need to adjust it in ways, make sure we get the public benefits. We absolutely have to push forward. It's the only way we will get the number of affordable homes and units that we need in the short term. If we start all over, we not only will slow the process down by years, what we're really saying to the people who need help today is you don't matter. There is no help on the way. And so yes, we can do better by engaging neighborhoods to make sure that as we roll it out, we're being smart about how this happens, but we cannot start over. She has said she would start over. I don't think that's the smart way to go.
Okay, you say that she wants to start over again. Cary Moon, do you want to start over again on HALA?
no. I think that HALA is an important part of the solution. We do need private development to step up and help build affordable housing as they're building market rate housing. That is one part of the solution. But it's never going to get us anywhere near the level of affordable housing we need. So we've got to look at a lot of other solutions simultaneously, including getting more money into the nonprofit affordable housing production pipeline, looking at public land and how do we capture some of the surplus public land that is lying there unused and bring it back into use as public housing. And we have to look at, honestly, the speculation that is part of driving up.
I want to get to that
Okay,
too.
but so no, I don't want to start over at HALA, but I do with HALA, but I do want to be really mindful that communities in the South End are really vulnerable to displacement and gentrification. And a blanket up zone in advance of community process around how can we make sure that any up zones or any growth and development in our neighborhood benefits local community in a way that we can all thrive in community could be really harmful. Already we are seeing the blanket up zones cause property values to rise and cause that your nonprofit and community-based organizations to lose their the land that they had, were preparing to buy because a developer came in paying a higher price because of the upzone. So it's happening.
Okay, you want more community input into how these neighborhoods will look. How do you get that? You can talk to 10 people in a neighborhood and get 10 kinds of community input.
Yeah, so we invented neighborhood planning in the 90s. I don't know how many of you were around with the great Jim Deers, which was focused on a constructive future vision. Here's how we're growing as a city. Here are the new demands that will be on us in the future. How do we come together as a community, constructively identify solutions to get there together? That's very different than a top-down blanket approach from the mayor's office and a decree. So I would say bring back neighborhood planning to talk through how to do growth.
Jenny Durkan, is including neighborhood planning stepping away from the HALA process?
No, and I've been absolutely clear I would. I've been in every neighborhood talking to them and actually done walks where I have the upzone maps in my hand. And you can see sometimes why if you put the upzone in this block, it's wrong, but if you move it just a block over. So you absolutely do. And I have to say is, neighborhood planning is one part of community engagement, but it's not the whole part. And we've been doing engagement in this community far longer than the 90s. We have to have a very robust process. One of the problems I think that has happened in the last administration is we have gotten too top down. Everything is dictated from City Hall. And I think we have to get much more robust about getting communities engaged in crafting the solutions themselves and the city being engaged with them.
When you say we should move ahead on HALA, does it include that community engagement?
Absolutely, and I've been clear about that, and no one is talking about just blanket up zones. I've been very clear that we need to get more neighborhoods and community input to make sure we do this smart, to make sure we do this right. But if we stop HALA right now, we will be cutting off the only additional revenue source we have for sure. We've talked about a lot of different kinds of taxes we'd like to go to Olympia to get the authority to do, but we all know in this room that for Seattle to get authority from Olympia for more taxes is usually more than an uphill battle. And so we have to have solutions that work today. Those are the solutions I'm looking at.
You both come from advocacy backgrounds. Cary Moon, you advocated to get rid of the Alaskan Way Viaduct and not build a tunnel, keep surface streets. Jenny Durkan, you were a prosecutor. You sued people. You put people in jail. But as mayor, your job is quite a bit different. You need to bring together business neighborhoods, a 9-member city council, a huge city bureaucracy, advocates for transportation, for racial justice, the arts, and many other causes. Could you talk about your experience in bringing together people on a contentious issue with people who disagree? How do you pull people together? And can you give a specific example of how you've done that? We'll start with you, Cary.
I'm going to talk about the idea in general and then specifics, because I think this is the very crux of the matter in Seattle. We know we are a city with incredible potential, wealth, a spirit of innovation, tremendous intelligence, and shared progressive values like no other place in the country, but we are not living up to our potential. And the biggest reason why, to me, is that we don't have a constructive future vision and a clear, transparent, action-oriented action plan to get to that vision where all of us, civic organizations like you, neighborhood groups, city council, staff in the city's many departments, are pulling together in the same direction towards a constructive future vision. That's essentially what we need in this city right now.
Convince us that you have experience doing that.
So through the People's Waterfront Coalition, well before anybody was talking about what to do with the waterfront, I developed an organization in 2004 to focus on this opportunity of the viaduct having to come down. What do we want that space to be? And I started an organization focused on constructive future vision for a civic waterfront, 22 acres of land, city owns, but brought back into public civic use as the very heart of our city. And it started with 3 of us, and then we developed a large organization and a coalition of between 5 and 20 organizations, depending on what time in the sequence it was, and developed a vision and invited people to it. And we went through several different iterations of what could the waterfront be, several different design processes. But through this time, the city took ownership of the project, an organization developed it to lead implementation of this project, and it all started with a constructive future vision and a collaborative, inclusive attitude around how do we make a better city together. So I'll stand by that example.
Jenny Durkan, what's an example of where you've brought differing people together on a project?
I'll give you an example of that, but I do want to comment a little bit on what Cary just talked about, because if you really look at the crux of what she worked on, it was not about a better waterfront, it was about fighting the tunnel. And it was the antithesis of bringing people together. We had a contentious battle in this city. We had city council pass an ordinance. We had the mayor veto it. We had how many votes? And in the meantime, we're fighting about it. I frankly am very thankful that the tunnel's going to be there, because in this Seattle today, we could not afford to have another 20 to 30,000 cars going through the city.
Okay.
So I think collaborating and showing results, it's all about experience. So let me tell you.
I want to hear your example, but first I want to let Cary Moon respond to your last remark.
I don't think you were here then, so I want to respectfully tell you that that's not actually what happened. 2001 on the Design Commission is when we started the idea of how to build a great civic waterfront. I won many awards from the time period of 2004 to 2008 around the visioning of the waterfront. So I would just ask you to go back and check your facts, because there are lots of people who can vouch for the work that was done in those 5-6 years. But I'll let you continue.
Jenny, your example of how you brought different people together.
And just so everyone knows, I was here then. You know, I've worked on issues in this area, you know, like you, Ross, for over 30 years. We were 10 when we started. And on a variety of issues. I'll give you one: police reform. So you described me as a prosecutor, but for decades before that, I was a criminal defense lawyer. I was the chief federal law enforcement officer for Western Washington, so from the Canadian border to the Oregon border, dealing with chiefs of police in every major city, every small city, the prosecutors for every county in Western Washington. My job was that at that time. We suddenly saw video after video after video of usually young men of color being mistreated by the police. And it culminated in the shooting death of Indian woodcarver named John T. Williams, which was wrong. So I brought together, I had a tough choice to make because a third of our cases in our office relied on the Seattle Police Department. But we knew they needed reform. I had to pull together police leaders, trying to get city leadership, the city council, people in my office, Washington, D.C. DOJ, and work with the community because it was all about the community. We held dozens, and this goes back to your engagement question, dozens of meetings around the city to talk about what do we need, how do we get there, what do we do. We then worked to get that consent decree in place. That took a lot of collaboration, getting diverse interests around the table and moving forward. So it's not just process, it's got to be results.
You know, one of the things that bugs me about our president is he doesn't read books, watches too much cable TV. So I'm just curious, I always like to ask this question, what book are you reading now, or what book can you think of you've read recently that has influenced your thinking? Go ahead.
You know, the great George Saunders, who's any George Saunders fan in this audience? His book, Lincoln in the Bardo, really struck me. I just finished it a few weeks ago. Mostly I've been reading, though, nonfiction around people-powered movements, around macroeconomics, because I'm not much of a wonk, and around how to the housing affordability, global crisis. So mostly I read nonfiction, but a good fiction book can really just kind of give you a whole new vision of the world.
Jenny Durkan?
I always have about 2 or 3 going at once. Right now it's The Corner of Bitter and Sweet, which is so focused here in part of our history, and another's a really bad spy book.
I want to open it up to questions from the audience right now. We've got a microphone that will be floating around, and I want to emphasize we are looking for questions as opposed to statements, and concise questions particularly appreciated. So
Okay,
who would
please.
like to ask our first concise question?
We have a question from Eric Slabaugh.
One of the challenges I think we face is we often pass things that have well-meaning and consequences, but we don't measure the outcome. What will you do to give us clarity into the outcome and how to adjust programs that aren't working?
That is a great question. We talk a lot about programs and what you'll do. Talk a little bit about outputs from one of the programs that you advocate. Jenny?
Unintended consequences always happen, and for governmental action, it's almost always. So you have to be thinking and asking through those questions ahead of time. So the first thing you do is you try to avoid them by making sure you're consulting with the people it will impact, the people who have to implement it, and then you have to very carefully watch how it's working and make sure you're able to adjust in real time, because there has never been a governmental program that didn't have unintended consequences. So it has to be part of what's built in. So if you're the mayor, every city department knows that. And you're thinking about, before you roll something out, how it will work. You're talking to people who are going to be impacted to make sure you have that input. And then as you're going, you continue to get that to see whether you need to adjust.
Cary Moon?
So my friend who launched the Mayor's Innovation Lab, which is a national project that's part of U.S. Conference of Mayors, always jokes that Seattle's known as the land of 10,000 pilot projects. Because we invent things, we innovate, but then we don't remember to go back and test what worked and shut down the things that failed and scale up the things that did, and work on adjusting the ones that were close but not quite there. And I'll give an example right now. I think the new legislation around rights of tenants, that a landlord cannot turn down a tenant, was an excellent approach to solving the racial equity issue around renters, but it also created a new problem for mom and pop landlords who might have, share a duplex with their tenant, and they need a little bit more control over who they're going to share their house with. So I think we didn't quite get it right. We need to go back to the drawing board and figure out a different process for ensuring race and class equity in how we rent without causing unintended consequences like that, because we do not want mom and pop landlords to give up and sell to an outside corporate owner. That would be a worse problem than we have right now.
Let's go back here. What's your
Okay, question from Melody.
Part of being mayor is declaring city policy, but a really big part is running the government too. So I'd like to learn more about your recent business experience with managing large budgets, lots of people. Say, let's just take the last 10 years.
So large budgets, large numbers of people, what's your experience with that? Cary Moon, you want to start?
So my experience managing people directly was through my family business, which was not 10 years ago. I haven't been there in 10 years. I did a lot of collaborative work through progressive organizations in the city in the past 10 years and the collaboration of the People's Waterfront Coalition. But I want to talk about the future because I believe that what we really need in city leadership is we need strong professional managers in the mayor's office collaborating with departmental leaders in a way that we set up clear decision structures and clear communication channels. Because the city has 11,000 employees, we need to hold departmental managers accountable to do their jobs, but we also need to empower them to do their jobs because that is where the bulk of the work happens, is in the departments. So I commit to professional leadership in the mayor's office and a clear, transparent vision and action plan for what we're working on, and then empowering departmental leaders to do their jobs, especially in the delivery of public services like utilities, like transportation, like clean water, like public safety, because those folks really do the majority of the work of the city, and they need to be empowered.
Jenny, experience in dealing with a big budget, large numbers of employees.
You know, I think the experience question is one of the most critical ones, particularly now that we know whichever one of us wins, we'll be mayor November 25th. So you have got to be able to hit the ground running. As U.S. Attorney, I not only managed our internal budget and the internal operation, but as Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer, I had to oversee, you know, FBI, DEA, ICE, EPA, all the federal agencies that had any enforcement power, as whether any that would have civil actions. You know, someone's killed by a goat in the national parks, U.S. Attorney's in charge of it. In addition, I worked with Eric Holder and his Attorney General Advisory Committee, so spent a week, about every 5 weeks in D.C., crafting the budget for all of Department of Justice and its policies related to cyber enforcement. Unfortunately, we didn't get enough quick enough. But I think that, you know, it is critical. You know, bureaucracies will slow roll you every time. And as mayor, you have to not only be able to know where all the levers are, you have to know who has those hands on the lever and how to move it forward. I think I know how to do that.
We'll have another exchange here. Cary wanted to add something.
Quickly wanted to add something that I've been working closely with most of the city departments for the last 20 years and have a lot of relationships. I know how government works. I know how policy gets passed. I know where decisions get made. I know how to put the politics together. And I have set up a 5-person team with very respected names, former and current city folks who are helping guide my transition, help me set up the mayor's office, so we are already in good hands for my transition. It's already in motion.
Jenny, would you want to add something, or should we go next?
I'm focused on winning. I'm not focused on a transition.
Okay. What's your name and what's your question?
Bill Smead is my name. I lived north until 4 years ago. I moved into Lower Queen Anne and worked downtown for 37 years. Until you live downtown, you don't understand the city. So my questions are twofold. Which one of you is going to fix the chuck holes, especially Mercer Place on the way up from Elliott, which hasn't been touched in the 4 years I've lived there? And then the second thing is, why are there the same number of policemen in Seattle as there was 30 years ago? And which one of you is going to double the size of the police force?
Okay, we know you're both going to fix the chuck holes. On the police question, would you like to answer that, Jenny?
Yeah, we need to not just increase, I think, the number of police officers, because while we've added them, usually it's just for the attrition. We've grown as a city, but I think we also have to look seriously at bringing back community safety officers and others to handle those low-level crimes, to work with communities. You know, I've been walking almost every neighborhood in Seattle, and I hear time and time again, people don't know the police officers, and the police officers don't know them in their community. We need to go back to more beat patrols. We need to build those connections. And then I agree, back to the chuck holes, you know, it's about basics. You know, a mayor has to, first job is pay attention to those basics. You know, water, sewer, garbage, fire, electricity, chuck holes, potholes. We got to fix them all. But I think we need, you know, it is not just about public safety, it's about livability. And this election is not about who will be mayor for 4 years. We've seen mayors come and go pretty quickly lately. It's about what's that city we want in the future? What are we leaving for the next generation? Those are the decisions we're making today.
But would you increase the number of police officers, and if so, by how many?
Yes, I would. I don't think we can say by how many until we look at it difficultly, because if you look at the budget right now, there's not enough transparency into what are those sworn officers doing and what departments are they in. For example, one thing I would do is make sure that in South Precinct, we don't just keep changing the commanders. We need stability in each one of our precincts because the relationship with the community starts from the top down. So I think before you can get a set number, you really have to analyze where are they needed, what times are they needed, and can we offload some of those public safety responsibilities to a different kind of officer like the CSOs we used to have.
Cary Moon, you're shaking your head. Do you agree it's hard to put a number on the police?
Hard to put a number on it until you get in there and really understand the inefficiencies in the department. A couple things I've heard are that officers spend so much time on 911 calls and dealing with folks in crisis, they don't have time to do the patrols that would be proactive, that would be community building and trust building. So we absolutely have to understand what jobs can we offload to civilians and make time for the cops to do the patrol work that they need to do. So we have to look at that equation. I don't have the details yet, but I think that's going to be a big part of the solution. Second, they don't have time to go to the training that we need. We all know that they need more training in de-escalation techniques, in alternatives to use of force, in helping people in crisis, and in anti-racist training. We all know that's part of the long-term solution to help the police force be the most skillful, least violent police force in the nation. We know they want to be that police force, but they need the training to get there, and they need the support from middle management to get there. So I think this is a problem of leadership at the top and in the middle, and it's a problem of are we staffing right, and how can we get them, to focus on the priority activities we know they should be doing.
We have a retort.
Yeah, I just have to disagree a little bit. They do have the time. Not only do they have time, it's mandated now. It's mandated under the reforms, and if you look at the monitor's last two reports, you not only have the support of middle management, you have the support from the top. So I agree with you, it's got to be integrated, which is the thing we saw with police reform. We needed to make systemic cultural change, which is why I insisted on a de-escalation approach, a guardian instead of warrior. And I think we agree very much that we need to quit having police officers be the only people who respond to crisis. I mean, if you think about it, when people are in crisis, why is the only people we can call are people with guns? That just doesn't make sense. We need to change that and develop a better system and approach.
So to your question, no number, but that's how they would evaluate the police force. Let's go to a question here. What's your name?
David Woodward.
Everything so far has been, from my perspective, very domestic, very local. And we got a lot of folks here that are from all over the world. We are a global leader and one of the fastest growing cities in the world, extremely complex. What is your background that would qualify you to lead a city that is moving into the future as a major global leader on the global stage?
Cary Moon, you want to start this one?
So I think it's about collaborative relationships in the region. I think that's something that we have failed to do effectively in our last administration, our last two administrations. We are, our problems don't stop at our borders. We need to lock arms with our partners in surrounding cities across the region to make sure we are working together and developing solutions together. So absolutely we need to do better collaboration and power sharing and idea sharing at the regional level. And then when it comes to international relationships, you're exactly right. We are a global player. People look to Seattle as a leader. We have led on so many issues, both in tech innovation as well as in labor protections. There's a range of issues where Seattle is a leader, and we are in the eyes of the rest of the world. And I think we need to develop expert relationships with other cities, with our trade partners, and make sure that we are doing the best we can to be part of this international economy, because we all know that part of creating wealth in our city is about exports, and exports are incredibly important. Making things here is incredibly important because that's where wealth is generated that stays in community. So I think we need a really strong strategy around what is our relationship in global trade and how do we make sure that we're keeping the wealth we generate locally, reinvesting back into community. And absolutely, this is an issue that we need all the best minds to work together on.
Jenny Durkan, as mayor, how would you connect internationally?
Fortunately, in the last 2 years, in between being U.S. Attorney and when I started running for this, I was the global chair of the cyber and privacy practice for my law firm. And so I was traveling abroad a lot, advising companies and governments on their cyber protection. And with that, working with some of the biggest innovators in the world, some of which are right here, working with our companies. I think you're exactly right. We are a world-class city. And to stay a world-class city, the first thing we have to do is make sure we tackle those same problems that are hampering us here today. Affordability, homelessness, transportation. making sure we have vibrant transit-oriented development, because that's what employers are looking for. That's the only way we'll get freight mobility. So whether it's the apples in Eastern Washington coming through our ports, or Amazon's products being delivered, or whatever, we are ready, and we are the global presence we are today.
Let's go over here for our next question.
Hey, Jan Levy.
Hi. Question quickly. Your thoughts on the Amazon announcement that they are moving or building a second headquarters?
Oh, good.
And
I wanted to ask that.
Is that because of the current regulatory environment? I would just like your thoughts, both of you.
There are some who suggest that it's that Seattle's projecting an anti-business environment, and that's where Amazon is looking elsewhere. Do either of you agree with that, Jenny?
I think I just said it again, we're a world-class city. I think we will keep, and attract both companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Starbucks, as well as the small entrepreneurial and the cancer cures the thing. But we got to fix the problems we have, because they want this to be a place that their employees will live and stay. And the people who live here love Seattle as much as I do, as much as Cary does. And the way we keep companies here is we fix the problems. Homelessness, affordability, transportation. If we focus on those things and continue to show we're the world-class city that encourages innovation, that welcomes the business community as a partner in the solutions, I think we will get and keep businesses.
Cary, does the Amazon announcement suggest we're putting out an anti-business vibe?
I think the Amazon announcement was eminently practical. I think they recognize that the tremendous growth we have experienced in the past 5-10 years, we have not caught up with this growth yet. We have not invested in transit adequately. We have not solved the housing affordability crisis. We have not solved the school capacity crisis. We have added 10,000 kids to our school system, which is 20 schools worth of children, and we've only added 3 schools. So Amazon looks at the capacity of a city to keep up with their pace of growth and says, you know what, maybe this is too much for one city. Maybe we need to look elsewhere. So I welcome the idea of looking at a regional approach. I think Tim Burgess put that out this morning. Maybe we could accommodate Amazon regionally, but it feels just practical that there's not simply room in Seattle until we catch up with the growth we've already had. And I would just add, I don't think we have an anti-business climate. I think we need to keep focus on how do we build an economy that shares prosperity with everyone, and I welcome business, small businesses, large businesses, in being part of that solution.
Our time has gone to a close. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you both
Thank you to
taking the
everybody.
time.
Thank you.
Final thought. And a show of hands. How many of you would leave your current careers to run for political office? Honestly. Are you serious? Rob Labasco is the only one. No way. No way. All right, sit down. Oh, man, I'm sorry I asked the question. So, if we're honest with ourselves, I mean really honest, politics doesn't pay. It really doesn't pay. It's hard to get good people. The rewards are few, the risks are high, but you know what? We need great leaders now more than ever, because the problems we face demand it. It's going to take big thinking and brave leaders to solve problems like homelessness, our housing crisis, climate change, immigration, transportation, parking, the income divide, the education divide, racism, sexism. And I ran out of breath. The list goes on. If you're not willing to run for public office, I believe we have an obligation, a moral obligation, to find and choose the best people possible for the job, and that's what today was about. I want to thank both Jenny Durkan and Cary Moon for having the courage to run for public office, for putting yourselves and your families and your reputations on the line. Thank you, too. And when one of you is elected in November, and I mean this, let us know what you need. Put us to work, engage with us and other nonprofits in Seattle so that we can work together on these problems. And if you'd like to join us literally, I was at the Large Club Conference in Nashville earlier in the year. The mayor of Nashville actually is a member of the Rotary Club of Nashville. So if you want to pick up, Corinne, where are you? Do you have some new member applications? No, if you feel compelled to join us, we would be glad to have you as mayor. That was funnier when I wrote it at home last night. And I also wrote that maybe you could ask Tim Burgess if you could add Rotary membership as a line item in the budget that's coming up. But seriously, good luck to both of you in November. Okay, now this is it. I would like to leave you with a quote on politics. One of the key problems today is that politics is such a disgrace. Good people don't go into government. It's a quote from Donald Trump, and we are adjourned.